Probably 2 years into leading worship for our church, I started to learn some things, and it was starting to sound good at church because I was learning a lot about sound. And I'd have my other worship leader friends come and be like, Kade, how did you make this happen? And so I would tell them, and then they'd come back and they'd ask again the same questions. And I guess I need to work on my patience. I don't know, but I got tired of answering the same questions over and over again. You know what? I'm just going to put up a website and I'll write some posts so that you guys can go reference these whenever you have the same question again instead of coming to ask me. I was surprised at how simple it can be to actually create great sound, because I always thought at the beginning of it that I had to know all these complicated things to actually get great sound. And then I found out that if you just know how to set gain correctly and you know how to use a low cut filter, your sound's going to be pretty good with just those two things. So we came from an analog setup and we were using a Yamaha analog mixer with some rack mounted audio processing before we switched to the X32. And I was really hesitant to switch to the X32 because I'd had Behringer equipment before and I didn't like it. But I finally bit the bullet. It's the unicorn of Behringer products for sure. It really is a great mixer.
Yep.
We've been using it for 8 years now.
Kade Young, welcome to the Churchfront Worship and Tech Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, man, and it's great to have you on the show. We're amped for Churchfront Live 2023, where you'll be one of our keynote speakers. So we're really excited to have you out there. Why don't you start us off today in our conversation by introducing yourself a little bit? Tell our audience who you are, what you do, and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the church. My grandpa was a pastor. My dad was a pastor. So I've been in church my whole life. And my dad and I actually went out and started a church in a suburb of Tulsa called Owasso. We did that together 15 years ago. I led worship for the first 10 years, and I've now been the lead pastor for the last 5 years. But Collaborate Worship was birthed out of my time as a worship leader. It's been about 10 years ago now. And I keep it going, even though I'm a pastor. I thought that might be a little bit of a conflict to keep teaching church sound and things like that as a pastor, but it's not like you forget those skills that you have. And I still get to be a part of that at our church. So I love church sound. I love what you guys are doing at Churchfront. I'm super excited to be a part of Churchfront Live. So thanks for having me, man.
Man, I'll be blessed. I had no idea that you were a lead pastor at this current state. I totally thought you were still leading worship, doing the whole tech thing. So this will be fun to dive into even some of that transition and what that looks like in this current state. So, well, let's start off. I mean, you talked about your dad and being in ministry and just kind of having be a family situation there. When did you actually start leading worship? What age did you start? What context was that in?
I felt the call to lead worship when I was a youth, like in my youth group. So I think I was 15 or 16. And the call was so strong that I just started a youth band. We didn't have one at that point. So I just asked around the youth group, anybody play instruments, and we got it started. And those are fun days to look back on. But I became like the actual worship leader of a church when I was 18. So I got married at 18. And then my dad, shortly thereafter, my dad's like, I'm starting a church. You want to help me out and lead worship? I was like, well, heck yes. I'm the best worship leader around. You know how you think as an 18-year-old. I'm sure you can remember those days. Thought I had it all figured out. It didn't take me long to figure out that I didn't know much of anything. So I got to learn the hard knocks way of how to create great sound, how to actually lead worship and lead a team and things like that. But it's been a journey, and here I am. I'm 34 years old now and still learning, man. There's always something new to learn.
Yep. What kind of brought you ultimately to Tulsa, or where you're at now? Tell me the story of what led you to that church. Was that one of your plants? Is that the one that you did with your dad, or is this a different location?
I grew up in the Tulsa area, and my grandpa's church was in Tulsa. And then when my dad and I started this church 15 years ago, it's in Owasso, which is just about 20 minutes outside of Tulsa.
What a sweet thing to be able to still be at the church that you planted with your dad, and just to see the fruit of that many years of ministry still be there, and now in a different context. So did your dad, now did he step into a different pastoral role, and kind of, was it a handing of the baton moment, or did something, tell me the story of kind of how that transition happened.
My dad has more of like a missionary call in his life. He's been to the Philippines, I don't know how many times. Okay. And so when he was led to plant this church, he knew that he wouldn't be the lead pastor long term. He was thinking like maybe 5 years, and then he'd pass it on to the next person. There just wasn't anybody to pass it on to at that point. So he had to stick it out another 5 years while he was waiting on me to get ready, basically. And so once we hit that 10-year mark, he passed the baton to me, and man, he was so pleased to do so. He's still a part of our church, which I'm so so grateful for. He serves on the security team. I mean, he just comes and he serves on Sundays, but his main focus is doing his missionary work in the Philippines. He oversees several churches over there, and yeah, so it's cool.
Wow. That is, I mean, I'm just the father-son dynamic, and then doing ministry together, the handoff is really a cool thing to witness. I bet that's a sweet thing for your church, and even for your family legacy is kind of a sweet, unique thing. So, man, I would love to dive into some of the pieces that you bring to the table, and you've got such an impact in the YouTuber community as well as just the worship and tech leader, resources online. So talk to me about Collaborate Worship. When did you start that channel, that program? Like, what came first? The website? Was it a blog? Like, walk me through the birthing story of Collaborate Worship.
Probably 2 years into leading worship for our church, I started to learn some things, and it was starting to sound good at church because I was learning a lot about sound. And I'd have my other worship leader friends come and be like, "Kade, how did you make this happen?" And so I would tell them, and then they'd come back and they'd ask again the same questions. And I guess I need to work on my patience. I don't know, but I got tired of answering the same questions over and over again. I was a web developer for my day job. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put up a website and I'll write some posts so that you guys can go reference these whenever you have the same question again, instead of coming to ask me. I didn't know that it would go anywhere at this point, but I did install Google Analytics because that's what you do on a website. I just did everything that I knew to do. And I went back about a year later and saw that several thousand people a month were going and consuming this content. I'm like, well, where are these people coming from? And how did they find me? And I wonder what would happen if I wrote every week. And so that's what I did. I started blogging. So it started out as a blog. There was no videos, no nothing. I blogged every week. I remember going and sitting down at Panera every Tuesday, and I'd write a blog post, I'd publish it, and then I would go off to my day job and then come back the next Tuesday and do it again. And I wrote every week for several years. And then it came time to somebody's like, you need to start a YouTube channel. And I was like, no, because I'm actually an introvert. I had never been in front of the camera. I had no desire to be in front of the camera. And I still don't really have a desire to. I kind of like to go sit in my office and do my thing and then, go home. But this is God's call in my life. So you just kind of press through anyway. So I started the YouTube channel, and the results were incredible. I mean, I don't even remember who told me that, but I should remember because I should give him credit because my following more than doubled in just a month's worth of time. And all I was doing, man, was taking my blog posts, loading them into a teleprompter, getting in front of a camera, reading the teleprompter, and that was it. But people were loving it. So many people want to consume content in video. I would say probably 80% of people want the video and 20% want the written form. So we still do both, but our primary focus is creating YouTube content now.
Yeah. Man, that is so cool. And how big is the team, or do you have a team? Are you still editing, blogging, recording on your own, or have you hired people out in addition to Collaborate Worship?
I currently have 2 team members. My brother works for me full time as my creative director, and then we have a part-time video editor. So I don't have to do any of the video editing or posting or anything like that anymore. And I always tell people, you should really thank Dylan, my brother, for what's out there on Collaborate Worship, because I mainly just go in front of the camera now, do interviews like this, and then he takes the content and does what needs to be done with it, which is, where the rubber meets the road, right? That's where the real work begins. I did it as a one-man show for a long time, and that's a lot.
It is a lot. And if you're editing, you can get fast at it, but then, what happens if you screw up a project, or you've got all these kind of vertical formats and people are even consuming content in a different way. And so you've got to add to your tool belt. It feels like every day, some new technique or some new skill in that editing is kind of a broad, vague word. So, man, awesome that your brother has joined you and producing content alongside. So are you're really full time at the church, and Collaborate Worship is just kind of supplementary in terms of time and allocation?
I would say it's probably half and half, more so.
Nice. I
mean, I pastor a smaller church, so I don't have a huge time commitment, but I have a good team there as well that helps me with pastoral care sort of things. So I don't have to, I'm not the one-man show at the church, because I don't think that's how the church is supposed to function anyway.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
What are some of the initial, your heart behind Collaborate Worship was just helping the people who were coming to ask questions. How did you learn some of that stuff? Like, have you just kind of always been engineering type, and you because of your background in web development? Did you just kind of understand sound, or did you get trained somewhere? What was your background behind that?
It just clicks for me. Like I just dig in. I'm really curious about it, and probably that's what fuels it. So I remember many late nights at the church, just trial and error with EQ or whatever I was working on, or compression, and just figuring things out. And then, but I wasn't ever sure in my skill, because I was learning it kind of by myself. Okay. Trial and error. And then I would go listen to guys like Andrew Stone. He's passed away, but he was part of Church on the Move, and just one of the sound legacies out there. That he was in the Tulsa area. So I could go to Church on the Move and listen to what he was doing, and then try to go home and replicate it in a much smaller sound system, so, but I had his, he would kind of verify what I was learning. I would even go to, the guys at Mix U, they're still doing that. They kept the legacy going. And I would go to their conferences, and they would be teaching. I'd be like, and so they would confirm the things that I was learning, and also teach me some new things. So I'd say it's just a combination of learning the hard knocks way, and then connecting with the guys who do know what they're doing.
I love that. I mean, I feel like anybody who is proficient in sound at some point, even if they've got a course or an online learning environment, it had to come down to trial and error, because you almost have to tweak the knobs and hear the difference in just kind of screwing up sound and then making it better to actually understand what's happening. I mean, I remember doing that with an SM58 plugged into the back of the console, and just literally cranking EQ knobs and almost seeking and destroying those frequencies. And just for the first time being like, okay, I'm not live, so I can do whatever I want and really hear what this knob does if I over accentuate it. So I feel like, I don't know, the temptation is like, well, I just need to take this course and I'll wake up and be a good engineer. But I think a lot of times we do have to get ourselves into those seats where we tweak and really trial and error until we understand and it clicks in our brain. What was the biggest light bulb for you when you were learning? I mean, did you have kind of something that was revolutionary to how you have carried on into your teaching, or is there something that sticks out there in your background?
I was surprised at how simple it can be to actually create great sound, because I always thought at the beginning of it that I had to know all these complicated things to actually get great sound. And then I found out that if you just know how to set gain correctly and you know how to use a low cut filter, man, your sound's going to be pretty good with just those two things. So still looking back, it still shocks me that it's that simple. And I remember whenever I figured that out, I was like, surely it can't be this simple, even though I knew it was sounding good to me. I was like, how could it be this simple? And then I went to one of those conferences with the Mix U guys, and they're like, if you just know how to use gain and the low cut filter, like they just confirmed what I already knew. I was like, wow, these guys are even saying this, who have these like $200,000 consoles that they're mixing on. So yeah.
Man, and for churches who, I don't know, what are you seeing or hearing from? I'm sure your audience, asks you questions all the time. What are some of the things that prevent people from understanding that simplicity? Like, what are the things in our way that are kind of coloring our experience to convince us that we need more than that? I don't know. Do you have any feedback on that?
Well, I think it could be YouTube is like the greatest asset and the greatest hindrance, because you can go on YouTube and learn all kinds of complicated things. And especially if you're listening to the guys that are working in a studio and not working in live sound, they do all kinds of things to make the sound, like just to manipulate the sound in the smallest degree to make it that much better, because you hear a lot more detail in a pair of headphones than you do in the room. So I think you could go on YouTube and just get very easily overwhelmed and think, I'm just never going to get it. I don't even understand what these guys are saying. Yep.
Yeah. For me, it was always effects. I mean, I always felt like I have to use effects. I don't know how to use effects yet, but I need reverb, right? But if your gain structure and your low cut is not set properly, then your effects are going to sound like garbage, right? I mean, is that been your experience?
Oh, for sure, because the reverb is just replicating whatever sound you're feeding it. So if you're feeding it trash, you're just going to get more trash.
Talk to me about, especially in kind of your church scenario, like what have been some of the things that you've done to make sure that you're capturing good source tone? Because I know that's like step one of, and even before you get to gain, right? Gain is really essential to mixing, but if you don't have good source tone or you're not capturing it correctly, then gain can even be a secondary, step that can be a stumbling block. So in your, you have a smaller church, and it's a great community, but I'm sure you face your challenges of like, well, I don't I don't want to buy a $1,000 microphone to capture this kick drum or whatever. So what are some of the things that you've done in your ministry context to capture good source tone?
I'm glad you bring up this point, because a lot of people forget about the importance of source. Like if you're feeding trash into the mixer, it's not like you can fix it all with EQ. I mean, some people try to take that approach, but get it sounding the best that it can before it comes into the mixer. And you mentioned drums. I mean, it's not like you have to have the most expensive drum mics on the market, but you do need to tune and change your drum heads often. And that's a skill that I've not been able to develop, is how to tune drums the best. And so what we do is there's a guy who owns a drum shop in Tulsa, and we just have him come in and we pay him like, I think it's $150 or something like that. He comes in and he changes the drum heads and he tunes them for us, and they sound amazing. And he does that in like 30 minutes, where I've sat there all day before trying to tune the drums, and then they still didn't sound very good at the end of that. So some things you just need to bring in the expert, and it's just to me, it's worth the $150 to get your drums sounding amazing. And then when you talk about vocals, you can have a $100 mic, the Shure SM58, and get a great sounding vocal, but it all depends on how they're holding the microphone. You can totally drastically change the way something's sounding just by moving the microphone an inch closer to their mouth. So that's the guideline that we give to our vocals, is that microphone should never move an inch from your mouth. If you have to touch it to your chin to keep it where it needs to be, then touch it to your chin. But I never want to see your mic, going a foot from your mouth or 2 feet from your mouth like some people hold the mic, because that's just going to destroy your sound. So mic etiquette, getting your drum heads tuned, and then something we've been talking a lot about lately is acoustic guitars, because I would say of all the instruments on the stage, that's the one that can give you the most trash. And I don't know why they put such trashy pickups in acoustic guitars. You can even buy an expensive one and it still doesn't sound very good through whenever you plug it in. So we've been putting the LR Bags pickup in our acoustic guitars. I think the pickup itself is $200 or $300, and then you need to pay a luthier to put it in for you. So you're all in about $500 or $600, but it's incredible how different the acoustic guitar sounds with a better pickup on it. I would make that investment if I were you, especially if the acoustic guitar is a main player on your worship band. Right.
And acoustic guitar is just you can really, and I love the people who get a guitar from, Guitar Center or whatever, and they're excited to serve in their ministry. But I feel like acoustic guitar is one of those entry instruments that a lot of people buy. They buy cheap, and then they want to serve with kind of a cheap and acoustic guitar and with bad pickups. And so I think you face a lot more of that than maybe somebody who comes to to be a drummer. And drumming requires some investment. You've got to buy a kit. You've got multiple pieces of hardware. You've got to learn how to tune your drum. So there's a little bit more, I think, maybe skin in the game, no pun intended. But then with, I can go buy a Yamaha acoustic that has a pickup in it for $300 from Guitar Center and be good to go. But yeah, it does come with its challenges. And especially when you've got that tinny, boxy sound that's front and forward in some worship teams, you really want to make it sound its best. Have you also so you said you pay a luthier to put the LR Bags pickup in there. Anybody on your team DIY in that situation?
We didn't dive into that. I think we had to pay a luthier like $150 or something like that. So it was worth it to make sure that we didn't mess up the guitar in the process.
Yeah, I would not recommend. I used to work at a luthier shop, and I would not recommend just YouTubing how to put in a pickup in your guitar, because if it cracks, if it breaks, your guitar, their whole instrument's gone. So definitely seek out the expertise of your community to help you make that step. Sure. So what are some of those things that you get from the LR Bags? Like I'm assuming you're putting the pickup into the guitar, kind of in the sound hole. What are some of the things that you're noticing as a result of that when it comes to mixing for the worship team?
So most acoustic guitars, their default pickup, it's really heavy in those low upper mids, like I'd say like 600 hertz to 900 hertz, which is, it's not a very pleasant frequency range to begin with. And it's the one that you're going to have to control most whenever you're talking about EQing. And then the acoustic guitar just gives you like a plethora of the stuff that you're trying to get out of your mix anyway. So I would say that the LR bags, it doesn't give you that overwhelming mid-frequency mess that everywhere else does. It has this like, it's real crispy on the high end, and then it also has body at the same time. The sound difference is just, I mean, it's incredible. It's mind-blowing. Even without any EQ, without anything going on at the mixer, you listen to like the acoustic guitar before the LR bags and after, and it doesn't even sound like the same guitar anymore. It blows my mind. I'm not really a gearhead. I don't tell people to go solve problems by getting new gear, but I mean, sometimes it is necessary. And in this case with the acoustic guitar, it's like, go get the LR bags pickup because it's going to make a world of difference.
Yeah. Are you guys playing through a DI box in your worship situation for acoustic guitar players?
Yep.
Because that's the other thing I feel like a lot of times can be a culprit. You know, from my experience, we were just plugging into DI boxes that you could find at Guitar Center or whatever. And I'm no bashing Guitar Center, but their stock is limited on what they carry, right? So I would always just go grab whatever, you know, $50 DI box they had laying around, and then somebody recommended a Rupert Neves DI box, and these things are spendy. Like, they're not cheap. They're not, you know, bottom of the shelf kind of DI boxes. They are very nice. They're phantom powered, but they are the cleanest DI box, and they're the warmest sounding DI I've ever heard. I had never heard color or quality come from a DI box. I just thought every DI box sounded the same. And then we started using these Rupert Neves DIs, and I just was floored at just how much it cleaned up the signal. No noise coming from the pickup, like very, very full sound. And I mean, it was just easy to kind of get to a good spot there. And so very, very impressed with that. Obviously, again, not a recommendation to, if you're trying to save on the dollars, but if you're trying to find a simplistic solution, you know, and I mean, look at your DI box and see if it's in good shape and see if its converters are good. And I mean, that's another good step. So, man, acoustic guitars is just, it's something that I don't think a lot of people think about. I think they just kind of jump in, jinga janga, throw it as a shaker into the mix, and you feel good. But with good source tone, you know, it comes more opportunity to actually make it more present in the mix. So
before we continue on with the video, I want to tell you about our sponsor, the Churchfront Live Conference. It's a 2-day conference with keynotes and breakout sessions on topics like worship tech, worship theology, musicianship, and leadership. It is a great way to network with other like-minded ministry leaders in the Churchfront community. The sooner you purchase your Churchfront Live tickets, the greater the discount you will get with the early bird discount code. So head on over to churchfrontlive.com, use that early bird discount code at checkout, and I look forward to seeing you at the conference. Now let's get back to the video.
What else are you seeing right now in either your team or worship ministries? I know you do your live stream reviews, so anything else that you're seeing in terms of mixing techniques or even, you know, band makeups that you're maybe thinking critically about in this season of ministry?
Well, I mean, we just did some live stream reviews yesterday, and one of the biggest, like, the common thread between them is people weren't using effects in their live stream, or they weren't using enough. And I don't even know if they had ambient mics or not. I mean, we don't have those details. But to bring a live stream to life, it's essential to use reverb and ambient mics together. Otherwise, you're never going to get a live stream mix that you want to listen to. There's no life to it. You don't feel like you're part of the room, like none of that. So people need to start paying attention to that. And I have a post where I wrote on 3 different reverbs you should be using just to simplify it. You need a plate reverb and a hall reverb and a room reverb. And the plate reverb is for your vocals. The hall reverb is for your instruments, which can also be used on the vocals if you want to give them even more space in the mix. And then I use the room reverb on the drums. You use those 3 reverbs combined and you'll get a good result from them. Of course, you can make it a lot more complicated and go into a lot more detail than that, but it's a great place to start. Maybe people don't even know how to get the reverb into their live stream mix because they're using a live stream bus. And so maybe it's in the room, but it's not in the bus. You have to send your effects returns to your live stream bus, just to give a tip there. That's how you get your reverb there.
That's right.
Ambient mics are tricky too. And we want to create a video on that. And we want to do some trial and error on that about getting the time alignment of your room mics. And we went to a big church here in Tulsa not too long ago to do a tour, Victory Church. And they were talking about how they use Andrew Stone's balloon trick to get the alignment right in their room mics, because they have some up here, some back here, like they're kind of all over the room. And so we want to try that out at our church. We just haven't had a chance to do that yet. Have you ever used that trick?
We have not used that trick, but I've seen some walkthroughs of people who have. So for our audience who might be unfamiliar with Andrew Stone or the balloon trick, walk people through that method and how they would. What is the balloon trick for them?
Yeah, the balloon trick is you turn on all your mics and you record all your mics, and then you get in the middle of the room in the listening area and you pop a balloon. And then you can go back and look at those wavelengths and see how far this one needs to be delayed versus, so you can get all your mics, add the appropriate delay to them so they're all lining up together in your live stream mix.
Yep. And you can put input delay on those channels. Like that's how you would do that
right.
at a console. Because I think sometimes when we say, "Oh, just delay them," people are like, "I don't know how to do that. What do I do?" So you would go to your input on the board, and I think on most consoles, just in the input kind of processing, the last step is delay. So you would increase or decrease that delay amount to sync up with everything.
Yep, correct.
Love it. Man, the balloon trick is like one of those, I think it'll go down in history as one of those best options because it's a loud, when you pop a balloon, it's loud. So you see a good waveform and it's easy. I mean, it's cheap. You don't have to buy like a room tuning microphone. You don't have to do any crazy things. I guess you could still do the clap method. If you didn't have a balloon, you could theoretically do the same thing with just recording a clap. But yeah, man, those guys have really left a good legacy for us learners in the industry.
Yeah, for sure.
So with you said something else about effects, and I want to go back to that. You mentioned 3 different types of reverbs. I know you got the post about it. Why would somebody use one reverb over another on instruments and vocals? Like, what's the reason that you use a hall versus a plate on certain inputs?
So plate reverb is a brighter reverb, and it usually has a shorter decay time. Of course, you can program that to whatever you want to, but I prefer a shorter decay time. And what that does is it adds presence and life to your vocals. It just brings them alive. You don't necessarily know that it's there. Like, you're not hearing this big long trail of reverb. It's fairly short, but it's just like, wow, that vocal just came alive. And then the hall reverb is a duller reverb. It more blends into the mix, and I like to put a longer decay time on that, like 2 to 3 seconds, so that you get that trail of reverb whenever you want it. And the reason I use a plate on vocals and a hall on instruments primarily is to keep the vocals on top of the mix, because the vocals in a worship setting are your most important part of the mix. And if you add brightness to the instruments, they end up fighting with the vocals. You want that brightness and that presence to come from the vocals.
I love that. Such a simple answer, man. You've got it kind of dialed down to the language that keeps it simple and kind of demystifies some of that ambiguous sound language that we can often come across. So I know you guys, are you still mixing on an X32 at your church, or have you transitioned to a different console?
We're still using the X32. I have a wing on hand because Sweetwater sent us one, and we've been creating some content on that, but right now it's just sitting in my studio. We're trying to decide if we want to implement it at church or not, because you have your volunteers have to learn how to use a new mixer. So is it worth it or is it not worth it?
Yep. What's when you guys, and I don't know the story behind it, but when you guys bought the X32, what were you guys thinking through? What were you guys coming from? And do you have the full size, the compact producer? Which line do you have?
So we came from an analog setup, and we were using a Yamaha analog mixer with some rack-mounted audio processing before we switched to the X32. And I was really hesitant to switch to the X32 because I'd had Behringer equipment before, and I didn't like it. And but I finally bit the bullet. I was like, man, people are saying they really love it, so I guess I'll give it a chance. And it's the unicorn of Behringer products for sure. It really is a great mixer. Yep. I mean, we've been using it for 8 years now. We started with the full version. We recently did a tech booth remodel where we didn't have room on our tech desk for the full version. So we bought the compact, which I love. I prefer the compact over the full version. It has all the functionality that you need. Sure, you have more pages of faders that you have to sort through, but I've never found that to be a problem. So anybody who's buying one for the first time, I always recommend the compact, unless you need those analog inputs on the back, because the compact only has 16 analog inputs, whereas the full version has 32. We use a digital snake, so it didn't matter for us either way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, I would agree with your comment about the unicorn, because we bought the X32. That was how I met Jake initially. Jake is the CEO of Churchfront, and he had worked at a school, and they had moved from an analog mixer to the X32. And this was when it first came out. I mean, I think this was probably going on 10 years ago. And it was like, there was no YouTube for it. I mean, there were no resources, because it was just a brand new Behringer product. And everybody's like, what's a Behringer? Everybody was pronouncing it weird. And so he moved away from that job at the school. I got hired in the same role, and I inherited this digital mixer. I had never run sound in my life. And that was my job, was to, run sound, kind of learn this mixer, run all the school plays and stuff like that, lead the worship team. And I just remember learning it by, again, cranking those faders, but it was such a fun experience to figure it out. And now to see kind of the scale at which it is really cool to see how popular it is, how much of I think a workhorse it is for different environments. So, yeah, it definitely is. I don't know. It is the unicorn, but I mean, if you've got how are you processing through beyond the volunteer piece of it? How are you processing through sticking with the Behringer versus the Wing? Like, do you have any shortcomings with the Behringer in your experience at your church? Or is it just like, man, we could live on this thing for the next 20 years? Or are there things about the Wing that you would be attracted to adding that to your mix?
I can't think of any shortcomings with the X32, and that seems kind of strange to say, because I feel like I should come up with something, but it does what we need, and it's never failed us. We've never had like popping or hissing or channel problems or the mixer freezing up on it. Like, that's never happened in 8 years. So our volunteers are well versed on the X32, and my courses I created using the X32. I use my courses at my church whenever we bring on a new sound volunteer. So, I mean, we plan on creating some courses with the Wing too for those who are using the Wing. But in my case, currently, I mean, the X32 is just kind of the clear winner. The Wing's great. One of my favorite things about the Wing is that it has a touch screen, and I feel like that changes the barrier to entry for newbies. I think that could be the feature that helps newbies learn to mix easier, because we're all used to using touch screens. I'm 34, and so whenever I graduated high school, the iPhone wasn't even out yet. It actually came out that year. So I had no life before touchscreens. So to me, the X32 is no big deal that I have to push and twist knobs and do that sort of thing. But to our newcomers coming up, all they know how to use is a touchscreen. So I could see the Wing just being a lot easier, especially for the new generation to use. Yeah,
so true. I mean, because I guess it's just hand-eye coordination when it comes to mixing quickly and, dialing in trouble spots where grabbing a screen with a finger versus making sure you grab the right encoder or select the right thing and then grab the encoder is it's just a quicker process. So it maybe streamlines that a little bit for somebody getting started. I never thought about it that way, but that's so true.
Yeah, and if we had a need for more inputs, which we almost do, we're almost using all 32 of them on the X32, because we're tuning our vocals using the X32, which takes up 2 channels for each vocal to pull that off.
Yeah.
So we're almost using them all. If we needed more, if we expand our band or something like that, that's when probably the Wing would come into play. Because one of the greatest benefits of the Wing is, like, any channel can be a stereo channel, right? Whereas on the X32, you have to use 2 channels on the X32 to have a stereo channel. So that really opens it up. And not only that, but you have 40 available inputs, or I think it's 48, right, on the Wing versus 32 on the X32. That's a huge difference.
And are you guys capped in terms of the amount of stage boxes that you have linked with your X32? Because I know you can daisy chain stage boxes and get more inputs essentially, but it's virtual, and so I don't know how that works with your guys' setup. But are you guys capped at that?
We're not capped, but I don't know that I'd want to like transition into like the virtual where part of your channels are running virtually, part are on the X32 because that just complicates the setup. Yep. I'm not sure how easy a volunteer would be able to wrap their mind around that.
Yep. When you guys were, I meant to ask you this earlier, but when you guys were getting started, what made you get a X32 versus another digital console? Because digital consoles were out, right? I mean, Yamaha had the LS9. There were a couple other, I think, like kind of entry-level mixers back in the day. So I don't know, when you were shopping around for it, was it just price that made you get into the Behringer product, or was it another, because it was new, like there was no history behind how reliable it would be?
I think it's a combination of price and then just watching reviews online and seeing how people were falling in love with it. Pretty sure I had a friend that got one before I did and they loved it too. So I just decided to take a chance on it. Yeah.
Yep. And you guys, now you said you're going to start making content with the Wing for your courses and things like that. What's maybe, we already talked about stereo channels, but anything else stick out to you in terms of a reason that somebody would pick that over the X32 beyond just, the amount of inputs and outputs? I guess you mentioned touchscreen too, but anything else significant around that?
I was impressed with the way the routing is set up on the Wing versus the X32. I'd say routing is one of the most cumbersome things on the X32, which really isn't that big of a deal because your everyday volunteers aren't going to have to mess with routing. That's just kind of something that the main guide sets up. But they made it a lot easier on the Wing, which I was impressed with because I don't know why they had to make it so complicated on the X32. I mean, you really have to sit there and think about it. You're like, all right, how am I going to pull this off?
And it's not, at least from my experience, it's not consistent with their offline editor. So their offline editor functions much more like other consoles do in terms of routing, but then the firmware on the actual console itself is vastly different. Like it's just a totally different, language and thinking. And so you kind of have to like pick which land you're going to be in. And so I don't know, we always are like, man, if you can just patch in your offline editor, if you can sync it up with your computer and do all of your routing, your patching in the offline editor, you'll be happy with the console because you won't have to think about routing when you look at the console. But if you have to do all the routing in the console, you're going to be pulling your hair out a little bit for some period of time until you wrap your head around how they did it. So I don't know, that's besides the point, but
it's a good point.
So what do they do on the Wing that changes that? I mean, can you talk the specifics about what's different when it comes to the routing that people would be, maybe that would help them make a decision?
Yeah. So when you go on the X32, I think there's like, I have to count them, 8 or 9 screens for the routing, right? And the Wing narrows this down to 3. And a thing that I love about the Wing that you don't have on the X32 is you have all your inputs coming in, but you may or may not use those inputs on actual channels on your mixer. But you can still program the name and what's the other thing that you can kind of categorize them and group them together so that whenever you need to go grab that input later, like maybe you use it one Sunday, but you don't use it the next or something like that. Like all the settings are saved in there for that input and you can just come in and apply it to one of your channels. You don't have that ability on the X32. But yeah, the main thing is from 8 screens to 3 screens, it just simplifies the whole process.
So much more streamlined. Did you guys, have you ever, in your courses and things like that, have you ever dabbled in Allen Heath or any other mixer, things like that when you're teaching people? What do you do when you come up against, other consoles?
Most of them are pretty similar in language. So as I'm like coaching my students who are using other mixers, like there's usually not a problem translating the information from the X32 to the other popular ones like the LS9 and the QU32. But I've not used the QU32, but I've used the LS9 before. And it was a surprise. Like I was going to mix at an event. I brought my X32, but they had a stage box for the LS9 already ran. And so I had to use that mixer. And man, it's amazing how much just like, it's all the same features, all the same functions, but all in different menus and things like that. And I'm just like, I only had an hour or 2 hours or something like that to get the whole thing set up. So I'm just like stressed out over this. And by the end of it, I figured out how to use it, but I wouldn't use it again because it's probably just because I've used the X32 for so long is why I prefer it. I don't know that it's necessarily better than the LS9. Somebody who is proficient on both could probably answer that better than I could.
Yeah. Well, I hope it's an encouragement to listeners because it's just such a common question of like, man, I don't want to take a training that's not on my console and, not understand it. And the encouragement we always give people is that it really is just menus. That's like, if you can learn how to tab through things and just understand the layout of the menus, then you'll be fine. I mean, it's similar to, I compare it to, and I don't know how far this analogy lasts, but it is similar to driving a car. Like, once you learn where the gas and the brake and the shifter and the turn signals and the brights are, you're pretty much good to get in any car. You know what I'm saying? Like, even though they might be a little bit organized a little bit differently and the positions might be, I don't know, like I feel like sometimes the turn signals are just, I don't know, how they click off is different. And so you got to just kind of learn those little nuances. But for the most part, your gain, your compression, your EQ, like, you've got your tools, and now just figure out how to navigate those tools and you'll be in great shape. Are there any days where you miss analog? Have you ever thought about or had that conversation where would you go back to an analog mixer for any kind of an event?
No, there's not a day that I miss it.
Because I don't know, I wrestle with this, and maybe you can speak into this, but I hear all the time, man, my audio guy is an analog guy. He just loves analog. And I'm a millennial, I just turned 30 this year. So my question is like, why? Why do you love analog? Like, it's your pencil sheets, detailing where your knobs have to be set, and like the lack of ability to be flexible and recall situations. Like, what makes you love analog? Do you have any thoughts on what would make somebody stick in that season?
Well, I have a guy in our church. He's our guitar player, but he also teaches sound engineering at our local tech college.
Nice.
And he's in his, I think he's about to turn 60. So he came from the analog days. And so he still loves the analog days. And he says the analog things sound better. But I'm like, can you really tell the difference? I know the average person isn't going to tell the difference, especially like in a congregation. If we had analog versus digital, we said, can you hear the difference? And they'd all say no.
Right.
So that's what I always come down to. It's like, his name's Tim. Tim, you may hear the difference, but nobody else does. So you can have your analog gear at home, but we're going to keep using digital gear here. Yeah.
And you really, I mean, that goes back to what you said earlier. Some of that is from studio world. I'm assuming people who have high fidelity speakers, they're listening through these high quality output sources that they do hear a lot of those nuances. But again, in a congregation PA, like, I mean, your average dad and mom walking in with their kind of couple kids or whatnot, the grandma who's coming in to, sit with their Bible study ladies, like, they're not going to care or be misled in following the Lord by the analog versus digital quality of audio from my experience.
Yeah, and there's always give and take, right, with everything. So maybe a digital mixer does color the sound versus analog. And so you kind of have to give that in order to have the flexibility of recalling scenes in multiple churches, or the youth group can use your mixer and it's not a big deal and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Are you teaching, I mean, my one last question about how you're navigating your congregation and the worship environment, are you teaching people how to leverage snippets and cues on the X32 for your worship services, or are you just kind of one set scene and then you're mixing song to song?
Currently we save actually a scene for every song in the worship set, and we do that during pre-service rehearsal. I would prefer that we use snippets. We just have a habit of using scenes, and I haven't been inserted myself to go in and switch that over, because snippets are a more useful function for things like song to song versus scenes, because scenes are saving everything on your mixer, whereas snippets could just save like the fader positions or things like that. So we'll run into problems if, say, you're on song 2, you've already saved song 1, and you make an EQ adjustment on one of the vocals. Now when you recall scene 1, that EQ adjustment that you made is gone, unless you go through and use safe EQ settings for scenes, which is something that we've done. But snippets would be a lot better workflow.
Yeah, because I don't know. That's what I feel like I watch a lot of the guys who are mixing at bigger churches. They're leveraging, whatever you want to call it, cues, snippets, scenes, snapshots. They're leveraging those things for song-to-song transitions and recalls, especially, I guess, when you don't have a very long sound check. You're kind of relying on maybe those features to get you to good places during your mixing experience, so you're not having to manually adjust everything. Why don't more people do that though? Because I feel like I talk to everybody on how they're mixing, and they're not leveraging those tools, song to song, moment to moment in their services. What's the hang up there?
I wonder if it's just because they came from analog, so it was never an option for them.
Yeah.
So it's just hard to work that into their new workflow. I think once they did it, though, they would never look back because it's such a useful function to have. You don't have to remember like who's the lead vocal for the next song, or, making sure you have it right from the beginning of the song. Because I mean, how often have you been in a worship service where they start the next song and it's the wrong lead vocal, or they haven't brought the lead vocal up in the mix yet. They're still buried in the mix. And here they come to the front of the mix in the middle of the verse. You solve problems like that by using scenes and snippets.
I always have to, in our church too, I mean, we have a Avantis, and so we could leverage their cues function, or I guess there's cues and scenes that we could use to do that. But I find too, it's frustrating for me when we run sound check and rehearsal and we get to the last song and I don't really have the opportunity to go back without making the band go back to the first song and run that first section. I don't have the opportunity to get back to where I was at the beginning. When I'm running that last song, I'm at a specific place, but then the first song of the set is way different, and it's different energy, it's different levels. And so I really want to get to the place where we're leveraging that, just to make it a more efficient process. And like you said, then you're not missing that cue at the beginning of the set for the service, for sure.
Yeah,
man. All these things roping around my brain, and I know I think in our audience, I know there's a ton of crossover in our audience, just people trying to learn sound, grow in sound. So I appreciate you kind of weighing in and giving some thoughtful input and feedback. Anything that you're working on right now besides the wing content? What's happening in the life of your church that you're excited about with your ministry?
Church, we're in an extreme growth phase of our church. Like our church auditorium seats 100 people, and we have 120 to 150 every Sunday, and it's been that way for months now. So we are waiting for the opportunity to open for us to move into a bigger space. Our city is a fast growing city, but there's not a lot of commercial space available. So it's going to have to be a miracle situation. Something that we would love to do is take over maybe a building from a church that has reached its lifespan and can bring some new life into that church building. So that's what I'm praying and hoping for. But in the meantime, I mean, the church is thriving. People are excited. And I know it's a packed room when we're breaking all the church growth rules, but the energy is epic in the room. So, I mean, I'm just loving it. I'm loving what God is doing, and I'm excited for what the future holds.
Are you guys already at a couple services, or are you still at one service right now?
We're still at one service, and as lead pastor, that's a decision that I've come up against, and I just take it in prayer, and I don't get any leading to go open up that second service. So I don't know that that's the right solution for us. And I'm not saying that multiple services is bad. It's just, I think every church should sit down and ask the Lord, like, what do you want for our church? So that's what I'm doing. And if I am led to start multiple services, I'll go for it. And yes, I know it'll be a lot of work too, but you guys do multiple services at your church?
Yeah. We have 2 services on Sunday, and we're kind of right at that point too of like, do we start a third? And we've rolled out kind of an overflow room, and on Christmas and Easter, we have to think about like 4 to 5 services when it comes to just our city and in our environment. We know that those will fill up. But 2 services on Sunday is right where we're at right now. But I mean, moving from 1 to 2 is one of the hardest things to do. Like it is. I think it's much easier to find a better space that just can comfortably seat your one service, because then you don't have to change anything. I mean, it's really just a location. But man, moving from 1 to 2 adds so much. Like you have to answer a lot of questions in volunteers, in timing, what service times are we going to use, transition time. I mean, it is a whole thing. It's crazy. It's still hard to think back to that season when they moved to 2 services and how much we kind of delegated and thought through in staff meetings, like what else are we missing? So I just exhort you to keep praying about it, because it's not an easy situation to move into.
That's interesting because I have 5 kids, and the hardest transition was going from 1 kid to 2 kids. The hardest by far.
Yep.
Going from 2 to 3 wasn't too bad. 3 to 4, 4 to 5, nothing at all because you're already outnumbered at that point. But it's just interesting, the correlation. Going from 1 services to 2 services is really hard, and it's the same thing with kids.
Yep. How old are all your kids? I haven't even asked you about your family.
We had 5 kids in 6 years. So our oldest, she's actually 7, and our youngest is 1.
Okay.
So we have a 1-year-old, 3, 4, 5, and 7.
How do you even keep track with 5? I mean, that is like, do you have 2 or 3 minivans? Like, what's the car situation at that point?
We have 1 minivan, and it's completely full. Nobody else, nothing else can fit in it.
Yeah.
But dude, I love it. Kids truly are a blessing, and I think that's something that's missed in our culture because everybody has their ambitions and they think that kids get in the way, but they really don't. I mean, they destroy your selfishness, and it's a very painful experience, learning how to raise kids. But in the end, whenever you get over yourself, you just look at them and you're like, wow, I get the opportunity to raise God's kids and send them out into the world to make a difference for the kingdom of God. I mean, there's no greater honor. There's no greater assignment.
Yeah. And you come from that, I think, family legacy story where you would hope, I mean, at some extent, I think you probably see some of what family can do for the kingdom moving forward, and how your dad, handed you a legacy of pastoring a church and the sweetness that comes with that. So what a cool thing to think even about the young family, 20 years from now, what that will look like, what your kids will be doing, and how God will be using them. So exciting to think about, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so last question as we wrap. My kind of maybe you could call it like a, I don't know, bullet round or whatever. But what are you listening to? Anything that's inspiring you right now? Are you a music guy, listening to any kind of good albums, worship wise or otherwise? I love to kind of get a peek behind the curtain of, like, I don't know, just what people are getting inspired by.
I am totally refreshed by Charity Gayle and the music that she's putting out. There's just something to it, a greater anointing that I've heard in a really long time. And it's just different than the mainstream stuff that we've heard for a long time. So my hat's off to Charity for the work that she's doing. Yep.
We did, we consistently do You Have Made Me Glad at our church. And it's probably one of the only like more gospel songs in our, in our repertoire. It's not an easy song. It's very different from your average 4-chord CCM situation. I think it has 3 or maybe even 4 key changes at one point in the song, and we do them all. And our musicians, just like at the time we introduced it, was like, oh, I can't just capo this one. It's like, I got to actually learn. I either have to learn the chords or I'm going to be re-capoing like 3 times during the song. It was hilarious. That's good.
Yep. She definitely throws some new things for us. Well, really old things, bringing them back into the current, because no songs have key changes these days until Charity Gayle comes to the stage and there's a key change in like every song.
I'm all for it, man. Bring it on, Charity. We want it. We want more of it. Let's go. What about reading? Anything as a pastor or as a worship leader, anything you've been reading that's been inspiring or helpful for your walk?
Well, obviously, I love the Bible, and that's where I lean towards. And one pro tip for getting the most out of the Bible is reading it out loud. There's something phenomenal that happens whenever your ears hear what you're reading. So don't ever read the Bible silently. Always read it out loud. But also, as far as books go, I've been really blessed by John Bevere's new book called The Awe of God. I believe that his assignment on his whole life, like leading up to where he is today, is to reintroduce the fear of the Lord to our generation. Because we've been taught a lot about the love of God, but we don't know the balancing side of the fear of the Lord. And he just does an incredible job explaining that in his book called The Awe of God. I love how he laid it out too. It's laid out more like a devotional. So if you're not a reader, I mean, it just takes you 3 to 5 minutes a day to read the chapter assignment for that day. It's good stuff.
Man, I'll check it out, and I'll put the link in the show notes for people to check it out too. It sounds like a good read, and especially for those who aren't readers and, might want something quick to, I don't know, enhance their journey and help them, grow closer to the Lord. So appreciate that. Okay. Last question. Where can people check out your YouTube channel, your church website, if they want to tune in with what your church is up to, collaborate, worship, like give people all the spots to find Kade Young and what he's up to?
Yeah, you'll find everything for Collaborate Worship at collaborateworship.com. You'll find all of our free content there. You'll find links to our courses there. And also something that we launched just a couple months ago called Inner Circle. And that's a monthly subscription for $12 a month. You get access to one-on-one coaching calls with me and my team. You also get exclusive content, live Q&As with AV experts. We had Jake Goslin from Churchfront on it just last month. Yeah, never heard of him. So yeah, go check out Inner Circle as well. And then if you want to learn more about our church, it's No Limits Church. URL is nolimits.church.
Cool. Well, Kade, it's been great having you on. We're excited to have you out to Churchfront Live October 17th and 18th in Littleton, Colorado. People will be able to connect with you and our other keynote speakers there in person. So if you haven't picked up your tickets, you can still pick up tickets for that conference. And I think you can still use early bird discount code, and it won't be as significant of a discount as it was a couple months ago, but you'll still get some percentages off of the ticket purchase. So bring your team, come meet Kade in person and the rest of the Churchfront community. So we'd love to see you there. Kade, thanks for joining us today on the show.
Hey, thank you. And I look forward to being with you guys in person in Colorado. For us YouTubers, it's really great to get that opportunity to meet people face to face. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. All right, guys, we're signing off. We'll see you guys next time.